The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Eleanor Hayes stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse office, watching the streets of downtown Nashville transform into rushing rivers. At 62, she had built her technology empire from nothing, clawing her way up from a childhood spent in foster care to become one of Tennessee's wealthiest women. But as she watched families below evacuating their homes with whatever they could carry, something deep inside her chest began to ache in a way that money had never been able to heal. Her assistant knocked softly. The emergency evacuation order had just been issued for the entire downtown area. Eleanor needed to leave immediately, but instead of heading to her helicopter waiting on the rooftop, she found herself walking down 30 floors, each step taking her further from safety and closer to a decision that would change everything. The lobby of her building had become an impromptu shelter. Dozens of families huddled together, their clothes soaked, children crying, parents trying to comfort them while hiding their own fear. Eleanor had passed through the same lobby thousands of times, but she had never really seen it until now. She had never seen them. A young mother sat in the corner, holding twin toddlers who couldn't be more than 2 years old. The woman's name was Sarah Chun, though Eleanor didn't know that yet. Sarah had been working 2 jobs to support her children after her husband died in a car accident the previous year. When the flood warnings came, she had grabbed her babies and run, leaving behind everything they owned. Now she sat shivering, whispering to her children that everything would be okay, even though she had no idea how they would survive the night. Eleanor found herself walking towards Sarah. She had spent decades avoiding personal connections, building walls as tall as her skyscrapers. But something about the way Sarah held her children, protecting them even when she had nothing left to give, cracked something open inside Eleanor's heart. Without thinking, Eleanor knelt down beside them. The twins looked up at her with wide, curious eyes, and one of them reached out a tiny hand to touch the silver necklace Eleanor wore. It was the only thing she had kept from her childhood, a small cross her birth mother had left with her before disappearing forever. Eleanor asked if there was anything she could do to help. Sarah looked embarrassed, explaining that they were fine, that they would figure something out. But Eleanor could see the exhaustion in Sarah's eyes, the way her hands trembled not just from cold, but from the overwhelming way to try and hold everything together alone. The building security guard approached them then, explaining that everyone needed to evacuate immediately. The water levels were rising faster than expected, and the ground floor was no longer safe. Eleanor looked around at all the families, maybe 40 people in total, and realized they had nowhere to go. The city's emergency shelters were already overcrowded, and many of these people didn't have cars or money for hotels, even if any were available. In that moment, Eleanor Hayes made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She turned to her assistant and told him to cancel the helicopter evacuation. Instead, she wanted him to contact every luxury hotel in the Nashville area and book every available room. She wanted buses arranged to transport everyone safely. She wanted hot meals, clean clothes, and whatever else these families needed. Money was no object, but Eleanor didn't stop there. As they waited for the transportation, she sat with Sarah and learned about her story. She discovered that Sarah had been studying nursing before her husband's death, but had to drop out to work. She learned about Michael Rodriguez, the elderly man sitting by the window who had lost his wife to cancer 6 months ago and now lived alone in a basement apartment that was completely flooded. She met Jennifer Washington, a teacher who had been volunteering at a community center that helped homeless teenagers when the flood hit. Each story broke Eleanor's heart a little more, but also filled it in ways she had never experienced. These weren't just people in need of temporary shelter. These were human beings with dreams, with struggles, with incredible strength hidden beneath their circumstances. Over the next several days, as Nashville began to recover from the flood, Eleanor found herself spending more and more time with the families she had helped. What started as emergency assistance began to transform into something much deeper. She helped Sarah re-enroll in nursing school and provided childcare for the twins. She connected Michael with a grief counseling group and helped him find a new apartment in a senior community where he wouldn't be alone. She worked with Jennifer to rebuild the community center, making it bigger and better than before. But the real miracle happened when Eleanor realized that helping others had awakened something in her that had been dormant for decades. The little girl who had grown up in foster care, who had built walls to protect herself from more disappointment, began to heal. She started remembering what it felt like to believe in human goodness, to trust that connection with others was worth the risk of getting hurt. Eleanor decided to establish the Hope Foundation, using the majority of her wealth to create lasting change. But this wasn't going to be charity from a distance. She insisted on being personally involved, getting to know the people she was helping, understanding their dreams and struggles on an individual level. The foundation started small, helping the families from that day in the lobby. But word spread quickly through Nashville about the millionaire who didn't just write checks, but actually cared. People began reaching out, not just for financial help, but because they could sense that Eleanor understood what it meant to struggle, to feel alone, to need someone to believe in you. Sarah became the foundation's first scholarship recipient, graduating nursing school with honors, and eventually becoming the program coordinator who helped other single mothers pursue their education. Michael started a grief support group that met weekly at the Rebuild Community Center. Jennifer expanded her work with homeless teenagers, creating a residential program that gave young people not just shelter, but real opportunities to build better futures. The story of Eleanor's decision during the flood began to spread beyond Nashville. News outlets picked it up, not because of the money she had spent, but because of the personal transformation they witnessed. Here was a woman who had achieved everything the American dream promised, yet found her greatest fulfillment in lifting others up. Other wealthy individuals began reaching out, wanted to learn from Eleanor's approach. She started speaking at conferences, sharing the lessons she had learned that rainy day in her lobby. That true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the depth of our connections with others, and our willingness to see the humanity in everyone we meet. The Hope Foundation grew into a national organization, but Eleanor never lost sight of its core mission. Every person who received help wasn't just a recipient, but became part of an extended family. The foundation's offices became gathering places where people celebrated each other's successes, supported each other through setbacks, and proved that hope is contagious when it's shared. Years later, Eleanor would often return to that same downtown area where her building stood. The neighborhood had been transformed not just by the post-flood reconstruction, but by the community connections the Hope Foundation had fostered. Where once there had been people passing by each other without acknowledgement, now there were neighbors who knew each other's names, who checked on each other during difficult times, who celebrated together during joyful moments. Sarah's twins, now in elementary school, would sometimes visit Eleanor's office after school. They had no memory of that frightening night during the flood, but they grew up understanding that when people face difficult times, there are always others ready to help. Eleanor loved watching them play in the same lobby where she had first met their mother, seeing how naturally they connected with everyone around them, how they had learned that kindness was the most normal thing in the world. The transformation wasn't just in the lives Eleanor touched directly. The ripple effect of that one decision had spread far beyond what anyone could have imagined. People who experienced the Hope Foundation's support went on to help others in their own communities. The teenagers Jennifer worked with grew up to become social workers, teachers, and community leaders. The families who received help during the flood became volunteers who assisted the next families facing emergencies. Eleanor often reflected on how close she had come to taking that helicopter to safety, to remaining isolated in her wealth while others suffered below. She realized that the flood had washed away more than just Nashville's streets. It had washed away the barriers she had built around her heart, revealing the truth she had forgotten during her climb to success. That we are all connected, and our greatest joy comes not from what we accumulate, but from what we give. The numbers were staggering when calculated years later. The Hope Foundation had directly assisted thousands of families, but the indirect impact reached into the hundreds of thousands. Every person who experienced unexpected kindness was more likely to show kindness to others. Every child who grew up seeing adults care for strangers became an adult who believed caring for others was natural and right. But Eleanor knew the real miracle wasn't in the statistics. It was in the moments. It was in Sarah's graduation day when she walked across the stage as a registered nurse while her twins cheered from the audience. It was in Michael's laughter when he told jokes at the grief support group, having found his way back to joy after devastating loss. It was in Jennifer's tears of happiness when the first teenager from her program graduated college. It was in the thousands of small, daily interactions where people chose connection over isolation, hope over despair, love over fear. As Eleanor looked back on her life, she realized that everything she had accomplished in business paled in comparison to what had grown from that single decision to kneel down beside a struggling mother in a flooded lobby. She had spent decades building an empire that made her wealthy, but it took one moment of genuine human compassion to make her truly rich. The story of Eleanor Hayes and the miracle that began during Nashville's Great Flood reminds us that we all have the power to change lives, including our own. Sometimes the most important decision we'll ever make isn't about our career, or our finances, or our plans for the future. Sometimes it's about whether we'll stop long enough to see the person next to us who needs to know they're not alone. If Eleanor's story touched your heart today, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Pure Kindness Stories. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that one act of kindness, one moment of genuine care, really can create miracles that touch millions of lives. Because the truth is, we all have capacity to be someone's miracle, and the world is waiting for us to make that choice.